Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name is Jeff Thomas, and we have a very special guest with us today, Scott Pomeroy. He is the CEO of XTI Aerospace, and we'll put a link, Scott, to the website in the show notes. But if you're not driving right now, type that into your browser and take a look at how cool this plane is that they're building. This vertical takeoff and landing aircraft is pretty cool. But Scott, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Jeff. It's my pleasure to be here. I look forward to chatting here with you for the next hour.
Yeah, our objective, as we were just talking about, is just to tell stories. We're all just kind of fellow journeymen on this on this walk through business and trying to do good things and use that platform effectively. To do, good business, build great businesses, but also for a greater purpose. So, we always start, Scott, usually by just doing the backstory. Tell us where you grew up, what your family was like. Was there any faith stuff in there? That kind of thing.
Yeah, no, it's a great place to start, and the stories are great, Jeff. I think there was a reason Jesus used storytelling as his fundamental means of communicating principles for life, and so I think the more we can leverage that and work through storytelling, I think all of us are better served with that. So, yeah, I grew up in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, so the Twin Cities. I was a Twins and Vikings fan from the very early days of my life. Completely distraught when we lost our hockey team to Dallas. The North Stars. That was just devastating. And I grew up thinking that every kid in America got a hockey stick for Christmas, because I did. And that was that was the hallmark, right, of the year. And we had an ice rink in our backyard, and flooded the garden every year. And I was out there as a 10-year-old, just kind of making sure we had enough ice to get us through the winter months. So sports, hockey, competition, friends, loved it. Loved growing up in the Twin Cities. It was a great place to grow up. Ended up finding our way. My dad actually worked for Carl Pohlad in the Twin City area. For those in the Minnesota area and Twin Cities, they'll know who Carl Pohlad is. Owned some of the sports franchises there, Marquette Bank and everything else. He was in the bottling business. He was in the early days when your individual bottling plants actually manufactured their own product.
Wow.
Co-ops had not yet been introduced, and so my early days were impacted by a vision of my dad at the airport. And wow. So I knew he was a hard worker, and he traveled the country. He was running 3 plants simultaneously while living in the St. Paul area. And my first some of my first visions of work ethic were formed really early as I would travel with my mother, and later on with siblings to the airport, and on Sunday night, and we'd pick them up on Friday. And
wow.
And so it was interesting, and I found a fascination even at a young age with everything he did, and so that was probably indicative of and maybe a precursor to what I was ultimately going to be destined to do in the world of entrepreneurship, and I think really did impact me for the balance of my life. He was self-made, hadn't graduated college, gotten his GED, and found himself as senior executives with major bottling plants in a conglomerate, and having a huge impact. And ultimately we ended up in Albuquerque because he was one of the plants he was running was RC Cola plant in Albuquerque, and Carl asked him to, limit his travel a little bit by getting into one of the cities that he was visiting on a regular basis. The family lore is that he took my mother with him on a house hunting trip to Houston, which he was running a 7-Up plant there, and they traveled to Houston in July, and she decided we were going to Albuquerque sight unseen.
Listen, we're recording this. I'm sitting in Houston, of course, today, and we're recording this in November, and it finally is below 80 degrees in mid to late November. So I always tell people, you're going to visit Houston, just don't do it in the summer. Do it.
Yeah. It is. I was going to say, with all due respect to the Houstonians out there, it does matter what time of year you visit. So
it does.
So that's how we ended up in Albuquerque.
I mean, it was much smaller, so it's a very different choice.
It was an extremely different choice, and very different dynamic, different environment, much smaller. Yes, and so I went to high school there, went on to University of New Mexico. Had my 15 minutes of fame when I walked onto the UNM Lobo basketball team for a week or something. We had gone through an NCAA investigation, and virtually the entire team for the Lobos had been declared ineligible. So they put out an open call to the campus, and I met the call and showed up and made it through a few cuts and got in a couple of programs and sporting news, and just long enough to mark some time until the real Division I athletes that were playing football finished their season, and then that's how we rounded out the team that year. So that was an interesting time in my young life, as growing up there in Albuquerque. Finished my degree there and started work at KPMG, and so that launched my professional career. And I think most people, as a recovering accountant, certainly that got their start in what at the time was a Big 8. I think we'd all say it was worth the experience, and it set a foundation, created a pedigree. I found that for the balance of my career, all I would have to do is say I'm a KPMG alum, and people almost immediately could conclude a lot about who I was as a consequence of that. And so that worked out. It worked out well. I did. After about 3 years with the firm, my father had broken loose, had gotten into business for himself. He had some real successes, developing some family wealth as a consequence of selling some of the businesses, and he was growing and wanted me to join him. And so I looked at my career. I looked at what he was asking of me, and made the decision to step away after 3 years. It was a hard decision to make, because I had a goal, I had a plan.
Right? I bet.
That was mine, and maybe one of the first times in my life where I started to realize, in our hearts, man has plans, but God orders our steps.
Exactly.
And so I really moved in the direction that I felt he was calling me to join the family business. And we were doing a number of really interesting things, from restaurants to office equipment dealerships to real estate ventures. And it was interesting for a kind of a mid 20-year-old to go through, and I got a lot of diversity of experience. But I also found that I was pretty headstrong, pretty opinionated, as was my father, and so we found ourselves butting heads quite a bit. And I had to go through some real soul searching, and really decided that my relationship with my father was more important than the business experience. And so after about 3 years of doing that, I had a very hard conversation with him, where I had to sit down and say, I think it's best, for me to leave. And I would say maybe one of the hardest conversations he's ever been part of. Certainly difficult for me. And and I learned through that, confrontation, tough conversations. You can't, things don't get better with age when you're in the midst of a situation that's difficult. Meet it head on, deal with the implications and ramifications, and and everything will work out.
How many years did you guys work together?
It was about 3 years.
Yeah.
So it was enough time to have a good sense of what the Sturm and Drang of that interface would be. I think he had visions of me, stepping into his shoes, but he wasn't stepping out of them anytime soon.
No,
So
right. And yeah, because you're only 6 years into your career or whatever. Like you're still in your 20s. So
yeah, exactly. And I was a little impatient, and
sure.
the 60-year-old me would have a lot different perspective than the 25-year-old me.
How many siblings do you have?
I have three. There's four of us in total. I'm the
Did any
oldest.
of your other siblings get into the biz with him?
My youngest brother did,
Okay.
ultimately, but he was, not as driven type A personality,
Yeah.
I think, as I was. So it was much more seamless for him.
Yeah.
He took he didn't take a significant leadership role in the business. He took a role in one of the operating businesses.
Right.
And he was comfortable with it, and so and I've often, I respect my brother a ton. He's not wired the way I am. He's much more comfortable with a routine cadence.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it.
Right?
Different
And
personality,
yeah,
Have you ever worked with your kids? How many kids do you have?
I have three daughters.
Okay. Have you ever worked with any of them?
My oldest is working with me in a small, real estate venture I've got. And I think she desires to be more active and involved. And, she went out and got her accounting degree in kind of following dad. She didn't know what to do. And I said, well, if you don't know what to do, you can always put this to work. She finds herself a full-time job, managing cancer research projects for a large organization. She's done a great job, used some of those basic problem-solving skills and everything else. But we're working more closely together now than ever before, and I think she's enjoying that piece of it.
Yeah. So not in your full-time thing. So you're not butting heads all day over the direction of the family business, which is a totally. But I mean, we have a lot of people on the podcast that are in family businesses, and I'm fascinated. My oldest daughter works for our company, but not really in a strategic role or anything like that. But so we don't have sort of traditional. We've had people on like fifth generation, that kind of thing. I'm fascinated by the dynamics because I think it's hard.
I think it's really
I think just
hard.
fundamentally it's hard. And I like what you were saying about like, hey man, if it ain't working, like just head on. Would that be your kind of advice for somebody in that? Like, if it's not going great, like have the hard conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's none of us, by the way, Jeff, I'd say nobody enjoys confrontation. If someone tells me they enjoy confrontation, I know one thing: they're lying to me. Right?
Right.
Nobody likes it.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's that communication in a difficult situation is always the best.
But
because
clearly, and everybody feels better afterwards.
Absolutely. And what kills you is the myriad of permutations that you take your mind through of where this could go or what could happen, what the feelings might be. And you kind of, you bury yourself in the speculative notion, whereas if you just have the conversation, you eliminate all the noise, get to the heart of the matter, and family. And I think the reason family businesses are tough is because you've got the other dynamic of family, right?
Exactly. I was just thinking about hard conversations we have to have with non-family members in a business.
Right.
I mean, it's still good to clear the air of something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you don't have the added like, oh crap, what do we do about Thanksgiving?
Yeah.
Pressure.
Exactly right. And so, it was, my situation, my experience was it was hard. I agonized over it. before I made the decision. But, once we had it, it was difficult, and it took time to work through, but it was done with humility.
Yeah.
It was done with a great deal of sensitivity for the relationship. And really, at the end of the day, through my lens, it was done to preserve the relationship at the end of the day, because
Well,
we were, we were on a collision course.
yeah. It was healthy. It was healthy.
Very much.
But now things have obviously worked out, and you've had a ton of ups and downs along the way. Hit us. We were talking before we started recording. We don't have time for all of them, but hit us with a few highlights of some highs and lows along the career post that situation.
Oh my goodness, yeah. I one of them was when I decided ultimately, I went back to KPMG, or they sought me out after I walked away from the family business when I didn't know what I was going to do. So I ended up spending a full 7 years in total with KPMG.
Okay.
Before I left the second time. And when I left that second time, I actually found myself in a situation. I really went through the soul searching process of, am I wired to be in a professional world, i.e., a professional accounting firm like KPMG, or am I more entrepreneurial? And I really defaulted to the latter. Moved to Phoenix, and I became the CFO for a new startup that was capitalized and funded. It owned a few assets largely in the food sector, and it was very diversified. And my mentor at KPMG was the guy who kind of turned me on to the opportunity. And I'll never forget his words to me. He said, I have no idea where this opportunity will take you, but I can tell you this, it'll be one heck of a ride.
Right.
And just knowing the people. And so, literally based on that, and
Yes.
and a sense that, I needed to do something different than what I was, we ventured to Phoenix. And it was fascinating. This is where my career around acquisitions and financing and creative structures all started.
Okay.
And we wanted to put and we'll get to, what does failure feel like, or less than what we had defined success to be. Maybe failure isn't a good word, but we had put a lot of pieces together. I'd worked hard. We purchased a manufacturing plant from Pillsbury company. So we owned the plant that was manufacturing all the old El Paso brand product down in El Paso, Texas. That was one of our anchor assets, and our goal was both a horizontal and vertical integration in the food sector. We reached down to, we were financing farms in Mexico on one end, and we were owning some retail grocery stores on the other end, some distribution centers, sort of all points in between. Concept was to pull margin out of these various handoffs in a complex sector. And we had gotten it to a point where we'd eclipsed 100 million in revenue. We were excited about the business. We then were headed into an IPO. Had an S1 on file, and the gentleman that I was working for, this was a real goal that he had. He had wanted to take a company public, and I think anybody who's in the finance world can relate to this. Is taking a company public is sort of, you view it as a capstone, right, of your career, and something
I'm literally having flashbacks. Pardon the interruption. I'm having flashbacks of, I don't think these exist anymore, but I was in public accounting with Arthur Anderson. And remember when you would be in the printer when they would print the S1?
Yes. You're there all night.
I'm sure they don't do that anymore, right? Remember when we spent the
sure
night
they don't
in
do
the
it anymore.
proofreading the S1? Anyway, for
You
all
got
the accounting
you got
nerds,
the blue
thank you,
line.
Alvin,
You're
for the
3
flashback.
o'clock in the morning, and you're signing off on. Oh yeah, I remember those days.
So anyway, I just had a flashback to the printer that probably doesn't exist anymore. But
yeah, I've actually talked about that with friends of mine. Remember when they when they prided themselves, and their competitive edge was how much great food they had, and how many games they had. For you to play while you were waiting on the next red light.
Exactly. Right. Okay, so you did it, but did it go? Did it happen?
So, well, here's the
Yeah.
story. So we're ready to go. We filed the preliminary, and I get this phone call one day from one of the senior executives at Pillsbury, and he says, Scott, I want to come down and we want to meet with you and Jim. They're bringing the corporate plane down. So we meet out at, and by the way, by this time I've moved to Denver from Phoenix because
Right.
our center of operations, were actually the guy who was the equity financing, he lived here in Denver. And I went to Jim and I said, look, when the executives from Pillsbury tell me they're coming down in an airplane to talk to us, this is not good news. If they had good news, they just tell me over the phone. And so sure enough, they flew down. We met on the plane. I don't remember, Gulfstream or whatever it was, on the tarmac at Centennial. And they said, here's the deal. This is not private, so you have to keep it quiet. But and at the time, Diageo Corporation owned Pillsbury, and Diageo had decided to sell Pillsbury to General Mills, and the co-pack relationship that we had with Pillsbury, with us owning the facility and co-packing their product there and everything else. And they said, well, General Mills doesn't like that arrangement. They want to own their own assets. And the message was very clear. You guys are not going to stand in the way of this multi-billion-dollar sale. So, I learned that, Fortune 50, Fortune 100 trumps everything. And they were really clear. I didn't get a vote in this at all. So they essentially bought everything back from us.
Wow.
And so we were left with one asset that we had. It was a Stokes Ellis. It was a facility here in the Denver area, because we had, my strategy there was that we would, the plant was underutilized, not a fully utilized plant. So if I could buy other plants, shut the asset down, sell the asset, and bring production, centralized production in El Paso, I could drive unit costs down. That was a simple strategy, and we had started to do that. So we had bought a second facility, and as it turned out, we were left holding this one small asset, and Jim came to me and said, "Hey, don't go anywhere, don't do anything. We'll figure it out." And and for me, I'm still full of spit and vinegar, and the idea of sitting and waiting till we kind of figure it out, didn't make sense to me. So I started moving to the next thing. But it was one of those moments where you find that through no fault of your own, right? We had the plans, we had the strategy, we had it was well thought out, the capital was there, everything was in place, but there were exogenous factors that I just didn't have control over.
Right.
And so you really start to understand, God's plan is different than yours. And so and can be, it can be completely consistent, but it can also be different. And so I
feel like it's usually different.
It's usually different.
Ultimately better, but not at every turn.
That's
doesn't
right.
feel that way.
That's right. And I had no way of knowing it
Right.
At the time, but he had me set up for a much different situation.
And so now you had a pretty big success, right? Talk about that. Was it the Dex Media deal?
Yeah, it was. And this situation sort of led into that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because, I ended up looking for a job and couldn't, and it was not, it was not what I had anticipated. And I ended up through serendipitously, the world would say, providentially, I would say, I ended up being picked to be part of a diligence team at Quest Communications. They were working to try to box some risk around the balance sheet. They were this is just before Arthur Andersen crumbled. Andersen had taken over they were doing the 10Q and they'd done the 10K, doing the 10Q. Anyway, long story short, I was on a team of about 50 or 60 professionals, former managers from big eight accounting, that were scrubbing the balance sheet for the company. Dick Naccio was there, the CEO at the time. The Department of Justice and SEC had just landed on the doorsteps. It was part of that whole Enron WorldCom exercise that was going on at the time. That was, post 9/11 and so much angst going on in the world, and they were in the spotlight. And I showed up on the scene, and unbeknownst to me, that they were in discussions to sell their Yellow Page business unit, and it was the only asset they had of any consequence that they could turn into cash, just because of what the capital markets were doing. Their liquidity came from the commercial paper market. That market had dried up and wasn't available to them. They were literally on the verge of being the first utility in the U.S. To go bankrupt. And so if they didn't do something, now the Yellow Pages had never been the light of day had never been shown on the Yellow Pages,
Right.
because they were all part of the incumbent telcos, part of the whole Bell.
Oh, I never thought of it that way. But yeah, of course.
Well, and what
I'm having flashback, man. You're taking me back, man. Okay, for those under whatever 40, okay, they used to literally put these Yellow Pages on the front stoop with the local telecom like name branded on it, right? I mean,
exactly. With the it was
with the wrapper, man. I remember in case it rained, man, the plastic wrapper on that sucker. It just kept getting bigger every year.
You bet. And it was we referred to it as the incumbent Yellow Pages, and it was born out of the fact that pre-Reagan, that the list of subscribers or phone operators, your telephone book that just had the phone numbers in it, was proprietary to the telcos. There were no laws that required them to share that list.
This is like the paper internet.
Oh, it was paper. You bet. I used to say to the analysts on Wall Street, this was the original 24/7 by 365 search engine,
right?
in an analog world, and so anyway, and just to give you a quick, anecdote relative to numbers. I mean, for all of us in business,
had to be huge,
massive. I mean, we had 56, 58% EBITDA margins and no calls on the cash. So the 14 state footprint, once upon a time, the 14 state footprint that was Quest, or formerly US West, was a $1.7 billion revenue business that generated $1 billion of cash flow. And and it was low risk, on a relative basis, zero CapEx.
There was no competition either. What are you going to have, another set? I mean, there's only
I enjoyed about an 85 to 90% penetration and market share. And I used to have analysts tell me, how do you get to 86, 87% market share? And I said,
you're actually mad about the 5% that didn't pick it up off the stoop. I mean, that's the.
I know my answer to that question was always, well, it's easy. I started with 100% and I tried a couple points every year, and
exactly.
So that's how you get there.
So okay, now you're like a business structure guy. I think hopefully we have time for another story or two in here, but and I do want to get to a couple of these other things, and what you're doing now is super cool. But all right, what are some of the quick lessons and what actually happened? So you spun it off and you took it public. What was the deal? Just quickly.
Yeah, so it ended up being bought out by two prominent private equity funds in the country, Carlyle Group, Wells Carson Anderson and Stowe. I ended up being the interim CFO to help extricate it. What I didn't fully appreciate at the time is when we did the transaction directly with Quest, is it was the second largest leveraged transaction of all time in the history of corporate America. The Yellow Page business. And the only deal that larger than that was the RJR Nabisco,
right. That's the famous one. That's the famous
Barbarians at the Gates.
Exactly.
And the number two was this lowly Yellow Pages out of Denver, Colorado. And now it was at the time when we did it in 2001, 2002, in the period of irrational exuberance that Greenspan coined. Following that, I don't know if I still make page one even, because the deals got frothy and bigger and crazier. And everything else. But when we did it, it was major. It was the largest check Carlisle and Welsh had ever written for any single portfolio company. We did a lot of firsts
That's cool.
with that, and took the company public in 2004 and sold it in 2006. It was an enormous success for everybody involved.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there and thinking, after that was all over, what's the difference, right? So let me look at things didn't work out at Lewis Foods. I've had a couple other things that I worked hard at that didn't work.
Yes.
And and what happened? So I'm trying to assess, how do I apply the learnings from this?
Yeah, no, I can't wait to hear what that is.
And I went through the whole process of assessing. I brought my A game every day. I
the level of effort was the same.
It was the same. I wasn't any dumber or smarter than in this deal than I was before. I brought the same number of hours. You know, and at the end of the day, and I don't know if it's profound, but it certainly was an epiphany for me, was that I concluded there's no difference. God calls me to show up, and he owns the outcome. And so I can't sweat the outcome. And because it really has nothing to do with me. And because I'm bringing the same attitude, the same game, same everything. And it was really a big moment for me when I stopped and decided, you know what? I can actually live with that. That's really the principle that'll guide me. That because I will always bring my A game. I'll always bring my best thinking. I'll always bring my most creative juices to whatever problem I'm solving. And
sorry, Scott, to interrupt. Doesn't it kind of take the pressure off at a certain level?
It absolutely does.
I mean, I think we talk a lot about at our company about obedience over outcome, because it will drive you bananas if you think you're in control of the outcome.
Yes.
Right? If you're responsible for the outcome. So literally, I think it's freeing to get to that place. I didn't have it for at least first 10 years of my career.
Yep.
But to get to a place where you're like, okay, get on your knees, ask God what to do it the best you can. Sometimes it goes great. Sometimes it goes haywire. Get back on your knees, make the adjustment. And, look, we live in a capitalistic society where, if you keep doing things God's way and a servant leader, in a capitalistic society, it tends to work out, I think, generally. Maybe your batting average is decent, but that doesn't mean it's going to be in a straight line. So I just unpack that a little bit more, how you use that going forward.
Yeah. So, I think the key is what you just said is it's free, right?
Right.
Because what I found was, whether it was failures or suboptimal outcomes, I carried the weight and the burden of that. I kept looking.
No, it's like on you to, yes, the success or failure is on you.
It's on me. It took a success for me to realize something different. That because when I tried to look back and figure out what did I do different that I can take credit for, I couldn't. The answer was nothing. And so, it's allowed me to, as I go into every other venture I've done since then, I agonize over things. I probably have stress and anxiety more than I should even today over things. But there's always that moment where I catch myself and I relax into the knowledge that I don't have to own, the outcome, because it's ordained. And I like your obedience over outcome idea, because it is, my job is to do my best work always, to show up and be, bring a Christ-centered, kingdom-centered focus to the workplace, to my coworkers, to my partners, and do the best I possibly can. And he will ordain that outcome. And I will be the beneficiary one way or the other.
Yeah. So, and I know one other little topic, I love that. One other little topic I'd love to touch on is, this is the Generous Business Owner podcast. And I think just bringing that mindset to work is freeing for you and frankly, everybody around you as a leader.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I know I preach it. I'm like, look, nobody's going to make more mistakes than me, but all I'm doing is getting on my knees, praying, doing the best I can with what he tells me to do, and then adjust tomorrow. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and on balance, praise the Lord, it's worked out, not in a straight line, but it's worked out. How do you also think about, and I know now you're running a public company, but you've been in all kinds of different situations, private, public, PE back, all these kind of structure things. How do you think about, even when you're in a public company, though, when you own a piece of it, you're still a business owner, right? I mean, and that's the mindset that everybody wants in a leader, even of a public company. How do you think about generosity? How do you think about taking care of the employees, what you do with the income you make? I mean, what's your kind of mindset about your business platform? You definitely are a business guy. Like, how do you think about your platform for generosity, or however you want to call it?
Yeah. So the most important thing I'd say with regard to your perspective on generosity, the word that I would use is intentionality, right? You have to have a perspective and a point of view that generosity doesn't happen organically. It's born out of a thoughtful, contemplative perspective that you bring. And my at a personal level, there were a few years ago, a workshop put on by the Signatory, a donor advised fund group who I admire tremendously. They put on a workshop on family generosity, and the whole goal of the weekend was to create, really, in essence, a family credo, a family plan. What do we believe? What do we want to convey to our children and to from a legacy standpoint about generosity? And how do we see it? How do we, what's important to us? And it's almost the moral equivalent of a mission, vision, values exercise with a business to your personal life, and also how you view generosity. And if you don't do it with that kind of intentionality, it just sort of becomes ad hoc, and you maybe do it in the moment, you don't, and that led my wife and I to the establishment of our own donor advised fund. We started to be able to develop some principles around how we give and how we populate that donor advised fund. I really had a wonderful opportunity in a small group to be with David Green from the Green family for a weekend, and David is well known for his generous the generous giving of his time to really share with others how they have modeled generosity as a family, and I just admire them so much in what they've done with the business. But they've been through a lot of things as a family, but their North Star, their compass, they'll be quick to tell you, has been born out of the intentionality that David modeled as the patriarch of the family, and it's been absorbed by the kids and now the grandkids, and they have a family business, not a business, but a family credo and generosity. And even when they were tested by the Supreme Court and decisions around their stance on certain things in the healthcare plan that they wouldn't support, they were able to measure it against their filter that they had created for what's important to our family. I think you do the same thing with a business. What's our view of generosity, and you create a filter that says, here's the framework upon which we think about generosity, because again, it just doesn't happen organically without that kind of thought that you put in.
So how long ago did you create your own DAF and kind of go through that mission, vision, values exercise?
So we created the DAF probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I want to say now.
And have you included your daughters in it at all, or have you gotten to that point yet?
We they know about it. We've talked to them about it. We've not involved them in it, but
Yeah.
it's something that will be a natural migration. We've encouraged them to set up their own DAFs as well, and and ultimately be part of taking over ours is as part of our legacy. So we love to. I don't know. You're probably, and most families probably experience this. We've got our network of friends who have kids that go off on mission trips, or they're doing all kinds of things. They're always raising money for those things. My wife and I established our own perspective that said if somebody asks us, we give.
Wow.
Period.
Yeah.
And so because it's hard to ask.
Yeah, it is.
And so if there's courage enough there to ask, we're then going to honor that ask with a give. And
Well, I think
that's one of
yeah.
several different principled notions that we
I'll
put.
just throw it out there for the folks walking on the treadmill and listening to this. We are going to take a group. We've got room for about 50 people in March on that trip for kind of we'll probably do it through Arcos, but there'll be some kind of the podcast group in there too, and also Bill Hyde now, who started the Signatory, is doing online ones. So my wife and I did like a 2-day, 3-hour a day kind of primer where you at least get vision, mission, values, kind of at least a skeleton put together. So if anybody's interested in that, just hit me up on LinkedIn or something, and I'll get you those resources. And now one thing that I know we've talked about, also a passion of yours, in the giving category of your time. I know you've spent a lot of time in Christian education also, haven't you?
I have. Yeah. I served for 12 years. This year is the first year I'm off the board, but 12 years on the board of Valor Christian High School, and we were a founding family with the school. We're there when we first got started. I think that was about 14 years ago now, and 2 of our 3 daughters went through the school. Our oldest was we only in the first year we only took freshmen and junior and freshmen and sophomores, and our daughter was past that at that point. So 2 of the 3 got to go through it. One of the most extraordinary experiences I've had the great honor to be part of. God's blessed that school in many, many abundant ways, and I got to be part of it. And really a passion of mine is still that school. What I've seen God do.
I'll tell you sorry to interrupt again, but I know I've told you this, but I'll just say it sort of publicly that I've got one of my best friends is his children have been blessed by that school, and I think there's a thought sometimes in sort of this community that we're trying to serve through this podcast that we've got that you have to. I mean, Jeff Rutt's on here sometimes. He helps out a lot, and he founded Hope International, which took off and became this huge Christian microfinance organization operating in all these different countries. You don't have to do it like that. I didn't found anything like that. Okay.
Yep.
This is kind of my ministry, my primary ministry, just helping give models and tell stories to people. The fact that you help create it's a meaningful enterprise that it's turned into, but I just find it fascinating that if you talk to 100 sort of generous business owners, God's got them doing 100 different things professionally and the way they give. So the way you're wired, that you had daughters that had a need, and you sort of helped get them through. Anyway, I think one of the takeaways is you don't have to do it like anybody else.
Yep.
Look at your own circumstances and what is God leading you to do. It might be something locally. It might be a podcast. It might be, maybe it is starting the international big thing, whatever it is, whatever he's telling you to do. You want to say a word on that? How do you pick what to do?
I think it's, a great lead into maybe a piece of advice that I give often to people that say, what would you tell me is the most meaningful thing to do? Historically in my career, I've tried to assemble what I would call a personal board of directors,
Yes.
right? And it's a group of men or women, but for me mostly men, who know me well, right? They know my tendencies. It's under the guise of seek godly wisdom, right?
Exactly.
And I look at how I'm wired, what I do well, what I don't do well, and I think that starts with being honest, right? We don't
Yeah.
we like to think we can do a lot of things, but so I'll go through a self-assessment. But then I engage the personal board of directors who can be honest with me, about does this make sense or not make sense to you? And based on a whole series of historic interactions with me, and they can provide sort of a non-biased, unemotional point of view and perspective, and I always get perspectives and things that I wouldn't have necessarily thought about, and that allow me to then take my own personal views juxtaposed against, those that know me well to make a good decision about what's next. I am absolutely a shiny new penny kind of person, and so I can be very quickly moved to the next cool, interesting thing. But I've at this point I've had, and I wish I had known this more
Right.
as a young person, that I need to be, and sometimes that self-awareness becomes more crystallized as we get older, and we have more experiences. But I think even in my 20s and 30s, I had a sense of who I was. I think if I had been more humble and brought some people into my life that I gave them the authority to speak honestly into my life, that maybe I could have avoided some things that I otherwise took on because I had a Herculean complex or something that I could move mountains. And
I think this is right on the money, and I know that is a perfect segue into kind of the way we always try to wrap it, which is kind of your advice for somebody behind you on the journey. And I told you that today I was just speaking at Rice's MBA program, and that's one of the things I told him. I said, I wish I had asked for more mentors, and even in a board of directors, maybe that's a peer group to some degree, but it's
sure,
asking for advice.
yeah,
And if you and I could do it at our age, I mean, if you're 40, okay, I mean, it's even more valuable probably.
oh yeah, very much
There's
so.
more road to navigate. So maybe just unpack that. So if somebody's out there trying to make a decision on a path, how do you put that together? Who do you ask?
I think number one, take it seriously, right? Be serious about it, and then I think it's approaching peers, and your elders, those that have gone before you. Don't be bashful. Everybody, if they stop and think, has a broader network than they believe they do, and lives that have touched them and impacted them, and lives that they touch in return. And what I found is people are almost always, I can't say always because it's not true, but almost always willing to give of themselves when asked the question, would you be willing
Totally
to
agree.
speak into my life? And I think it's an honor that you would ask me, and I'm going to do you the honor of saying yes to that. And yes, some people are busy, and some people can't, and sometimes the answer might be not now, but I'd love to later. But it's never going to be a question that somebody is gonna feel like it was an imposition. They're always going to be thankful for the ask. So be courageous, be intentional, um, be thoughtful about who, but surround yourself with at least two or three people that you can be honest with, and give them permission to be honest with you.
I love it. Iron sharpens iron, and I think we do have a tendency to not want to bother people or maybe be rejected. But I think the point is most people, like, think about yourself, like whoever's listening, like if somebody asks you, wouldn't you be honored and happy to help generally?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So anyway, that's how most people will receive it. So I think asking for advice is a great place to leave it. But Scott, I know we're out of time, but I can't thank you enough for joining us.
Jeff, it's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed the time and love what you're doing here.
Well, thank you. And thanks everybody for joining us on this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. Share it with a friend, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.